So right now I'm prepping for the lumens measurement of the TN36 UT. So as my reference light, only because of the fact that my PVC LMD, I don't have the cutout glass. Custom ones, I think I checked in some shops, they actually wanted $70 just for that glass, which I've held off for now. I've reached out to flashlightlens.com to see if they're willing to do a small run, but we'll see about that. So for now, the problem is that there's a flange right past this, as you can see here, so it's almost like a step down here. So because of that, it favors throwers, because throwers, the majority of your beams is going straight down, and thus you're getting more of the output over there versus a flutter like the TN36. A lot of that is actually getting caught at this lip here and not fully going down. So as such, I've elected to use a similar light, and because of the fact that ThruNite does also use ANSI ratings, I currently have the TN36 set on medium level, which I think they've rated at 785 lumens. I calibrate my light meters to 780 lumens. The reason I picked this level is also because it's bright enough that I'm measuring it at the 40K range of my XHP70, which is back here. So there's two main instruments I use for measurements. One is the Fluke 289 meter, which I use to measure the temperature of the light, and then the XHD450 to measure the lumens. Now with the TN36 in medium mode, it runs perfectly flat regulated. Because it is current controlled, you will notice every once in a while I'll step down to 770, then the current control kicks in and it'll bring it back up, but it keeps pretty much a steady state of 780 lumens, which is what I've programmed this for. This fan is just a USB fan, is running at bare minimum speed. It's just barely enough to keep it cool. The reason is I don't want this light conking out the first time I run through the runtime testing. So, but even so, like you figure, under normal use conditions, your hand acts as the heat sink. Actually, your heart, your blood system, that'll carry the heat away from your arm and transfer it. So there has to be some kind of mechanism whereby the light can kind of cool off. It's never recommended that you run a light in turbo mode unattended by itself. I do also have an old Sears hygrometer / digital thermometer that checks the temperature and humidity. Reason for that is lights run at different temperatures. Obviously, the lower the temperature, the more beneficial for the light. So I do take that into account into my runtime testing in the data set as well. Now, in terms of documenting everything, the X-Tech does have their own software. So I use that to graph the runtime. And pretty much it gives you a real idea output in lumens, again, that's measured on my PVC LMD. And then the Fluke form logs the temperature, so that way you could get an idea of how hot a particular light runs at what temperature. So, all of this wasn't cheap. I invest my time and money into this to ensure, I guess, keeping the manufacturers honest. And it's not perfect. I don't have professional testing equipment like, say, a true integrator, which runs upwards of $10,000, $15,000. If one of you generous viewers out there would care to sponsor me for one, hey, awesome, man, I'll gladly take it. But until then, this is what I have to make do with. But still, at least it should give you some idea of ballpark ranges of the lights that I have and consistency thereof of the lights. Again, the lights that I have. In the future, as mentioned, I do plan on getting that piece of glass onto the PVC LMD and redoing my measurements to hopefully get even improved accuracy. But that's for a future video. So I'm just about ready to start the runtime testing. After that, the TN36 UT mounted on top of the PVC LMD. I'm shining into the 2 because I'm using that to determine the centering of the TN36 UT. I mean, being off a little, it does affect the lumens, but only to a certain degree. But still, I just want to be as consistent as possible. Paper template is used to redirect some of that light that would normally reflect back out to direct it back in. And again, it's calibrated with the TN36 at medium level, 780 lumens. So right now I'm about to initiate the logging. It's going to be done once every 5 seconds. And go ahead and carefully get this started out on turbo mode, which is quick 2 presses. And just ensuring centering of it. Now those first few seconds doesn't matter because it's going to be discarded anyway, because per ANSI F1L standards, you take the measurements between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. I usually do it at 30 seconds. And here you can see it starts off very strong. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,900 and it's dropping quick, but I'll get that down at 30 seconds. And that's usually graphed as per my runtime testing, where you can see this was initial run but calibrated differently. But again, the information that I capture is the brand of the batteries used, the chemistry, whether it's lithium manganese or lithium cobalt or lithium ion standard, the size of battery, the milliamps, the capacity rating, whether or not it has a PCB, the nominal voltage, and the voltage at start and end. Then I also have the current rating as measured for the level that I'm doing the runtime testing on, which I'll get to later. the total runtime, which is again per NCF01 standards, which states the total amount of time it took for the light to drop from the initial calculated value at 30 seconds before it reaches 10% of that. So let's just pretend 30 seconds, I hit 7,300 lumens. So by the time it gets down to 730 lumens, that's what I would end the runtime testing and figure it for the full elapsed minute after that. So if it made up to 75.5 minutes, then the runtime is 75 minutes. And that's captured here. And the last piece is just the temperature. What was the ambient temperature of the room? And what was the temperature of the light at the start? And the maximum temperature reached. Now this is, the thermal probe is aligned with the last rung, I guess, of the grooves at the base of the head. So that captures the maximum temperature because that's just aft of the LED. So it's now the end of the runtime testing, and even with the fan, I've been blowing at this for about a minute now. It reached, I think, a peak of roughly 160 degrees Fahrenheit, so really, really hot. You gotta be extra careful. And even after a minute, still over 100 degrees. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to get this open. Above and beyond the consideration of how hot the light gets, more importantly is how hot the battery gets. Again, this was been resting for about a minute in the fan. I've shut off the fan, but look at that. It's 142 degrees. That's really bad for the batteries. Again, just got to use your discretion when running turbo mode unattended.
So why did I make such a big deal about the temperature? I've recreated this chart, which I believe the source is from a 1993 ASSE paper. I couldn't actually find it, but I did find images and I recreated this chart to help illustrate this. In the United States, the typical guidance for the upper limits of hot water temperature is 120 degrees. That's the limit that they suggest before scalding can occur. So usually if you stay at or below that, you should be fine. And of course, depending on your duration to it, this is how long it would take before scalding occurs. So like say an adult, 300 seconds, you're talking about 5 minutes or so. But as you get higher, obviously the time to get burnt or scalded decreases. Now the reason I have these three columns highlighted in red is because the ThruNite lights, as well as some of the other large multi-emitter high power output lights out there, can easily reach these temperatures. Now take for instance this first one, this row here. Adult can receive second degrees burns with exposure to this temperature, 158 Fahrenheit, 70 degrees Celsius, within half a second. A child within fractions of a second. So again, please use discretion when leaving the light on turbo mode for extended periods of time, because you may forget, you may be doing a ceiling bounce using candlelight mode because you were working on something. Before you forget, you reach back to grab it, and before you know it, you're burnt. So exercise caution. Alright, now it's time to dig into the runtime chart. I have three lights graphed into this single chart here. The first one being the Mini TN30, and up top is what the manufacturer claimed, which is the turbo output 3200 lumens for 120 minutes, the TN36 6510 lumens at 119 minutes, last but not least the TN36 UT 7300 lumens and 95 minutes. The slash here means either or, so meaning 95 minutes or 1.58 hours. Likewise for here, I had listed the runtime as 1.4 hours or 83 minutes, not 1.4 hours and 83 minutes. Now the problem with the runtime chart is a lot of times you look at it, you don't really get a clear picture of what exactly does that mean. You say there's 3200 lumens, does it mean for 120 minutes straight? Most obviously not. This is why it's really important to review runtime charts put out by independent reviewers. The way that I've structured the runtime chart is I list the lumens as measured on my PVC LMD on the left hand side here, and then the time on the bottom here. I also have a second axis where I graph the temperature that the light attained, and that's represented by these dotted lines here. Now this single red solid line running across, that was just an indicator that I put there to say you can receive second degree burns for exposure to 3 seconds or third degree burns for exposure to 5 seconds, representing that, hey, you know, this was a pretty high limit already, and look at these two lights, you know, they got way beyond that. These two lights were, the green one is the TN36 UT and the blue one is the Mini TN30 respectively. I'm sure the TN36, like I said, if I didn't have a bump unit, it would easily have reached up there as well, but because it never maintained the turbo mode for any significant amount of time, thus the mild run. One caveat also of the TN36 is the fact that when I measured it with the infrared thermometer, it seems like I may have misplaced the probe point on the light So thereby it measured a lot lower. It was actually closer to about 115, 120 degrees, that area, but still, again, just caveat there. Now the way to review this chart, as you can see, so let's start off with the TN36 UT first. At initial turn on, the light hit somewhere close to almost 8,000 lumens, but then immediately started steadily dropping. But as per ANSI FL1 standards, I measured it at 30 seconds and I achieved 7850 lumens. Now that beats the claims as put out by ThruNite of 7300 lumens, but keep in mind, the ANSI FL1 standard states that you need a average of 3 lights, so one could have been higher, one could have been lower, and I know people will put up an argument and say, well, you know, LED manufacturers, their tolerances are so tight, it's impossible for you to have gotten greater than 10%. Listen, man, there is more to it than just the LED itself. You're talking about the entire circuit path. You could have a bad junction, you could have a bad solder joint, you could have bad circuit, bad resistor, bad this, bad that, whatever. The point is that there can be great variances between two samples. For example, I've had two samples of Nitecore's TM26 light where I've measured greater than 10% difference between the outputs of those two lights. So again, please don't tell me that, you know, there's such tight tolerances that it's impossible. Trust me, buddy, it's possible. Believe it. If you don't believe me, go out and get your own sample of lights, get a cheap light meter. You don't even have to do lumens, just measure the lux and you tell me whether there's variances or not. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get back to the runtime chart. So TN36 UT, again, as I said, I measured 7850 lumens at 30 seconds. But one thing I did add was, because there is a declining output throughout the entire run, I gave now a better estimate of what you can anticipate throughout the entire run uninterrupted. Of course, again, please don't use turbo full, you know, unattended, but if you did, this is what you can expect, and that's the average, 4711 lumens. All right. Now that lasted for 83 minutes, which I believe was shy of the manufacturer specs, but I don't know what kind of batteries they had used for the runtime. I used their TN3400 milliamp an hour batteries, which I believe is their top of the line, so I would have to assume that they used at least that, or if not, maybe even 3200 milliamps, but the point is that I came shy of what they had claimed. Now, over here again, there was just the room temperature, the ambient room temperature. The reason why I record this is important. This may have also contributed to why this may have been outperforming, because the cooler it is, the higher the output and the less decline there is, right? So you notice that there's a less difference between these two lights. But again, the Mini TN30 was also outperforming itself, because turbo was claimed at 3200 lumens, but yet I measured 3520 at 30 seconds. And that room temperature at the time was 77 degrees, hitting a max of 157 versus the close to 160 for the UT. Now in the case of the Mini TN30, I did, like I said, measure 3520 at 30 seconds, but the entire average run was about 2800. Now that isn't too big a drop from the initial output, at least from 30 seconds, which goes to show again that it does try to maintain a what they call sustained turbo mode. As you can see by this graph, it's not a huge decline nor any steep, step downs in between the runs. Last but not least, unfortunately, we had the underwhelming TN36. I would like to take it apart and check out what I may be able to glean from it, but I did reach out to ThruNite. They will be supplying a replacement board. Once I get that replaced, I'll redo this runtime chart and post it. But bottom line is that, unfortunately, as soon as it turned on, it just wham, took a nosedive. Thereby I only measured 5830 lumens, but even then it was still dropping fast, as you can see here, and it only measured a semi-quasi regulated mode throughout the rest of the run, thereby averaging only 2400 lumens for that entire run. It did, of course, beat out the quoted runtime of 1.98 hours by almost an hour, but that's because, again, it didn't maintain turbo significantly, thereby it had extra battery to burn through. By studying these charts, it would help you better understand what exactly you can expect, with the exception of the TN36. The only other runtime chart I could find was put up by Self-Build, so hit up his review. That actually mimics the TN36 UT pretty closely, but obviously at a slightly lower output. He doesn't use a PVC LED, he has his own light box setup, but at least you could see that the curves are similar, and you could get an idea of the output curve and do your own extrapolation from there. In the future, I will be taking measurements of the current for turbo output for each of these lights, and I'll post it. My reviews are posted on Cano Power Forums and Budget Light Forum, and I'll put a link in the description so you can hit up the discussions that are taking place on each board.
So now I'm going to check on the standby current of the TN36 UT. Based upon historical review of their products, they are very, very good about the standby currents for their electronic switches. So because it is an electronic switch, there's always typically a current draw. Okay, so as you can see, they're settling down. It's about 14.55, and I'm not sure if you can make that out, but that's microamps right there. At that rate, you're looking at about 319 months standby time with 3,400 milliamp batteries. Again, that's calculated, right? And that equates to 27 years, so absolute no concerns with the standby current whatsoever. So this is towards the tail end run of the TN36 runtime testing, and as you can see right there, although it's hard to make out, the red light was flashing and all of a sudden the light just simply cuts off at the end of its power when it's depleted. It's kind of not good because it could leave you in the dark all of a sudden, but it does give you ample warning before it does finally shut off. So currently the batteries are depleted from a runtime testing, and I think it's back up around 3.4 volts right now. I charged it up a little bit, but this is to demonstrate the red light that turns on. As you can see there, turns on red when the battery is low, and to demonstrate that it does not turn on in Firefly mode. So there you go. So I'm just about ready to take the beam distance measurements, and as usual I have my XENO G10 V2, although of course this is a different setup now and I'm no longer in that hallway with light reflecting back. Normally I would be anticipating about 220 range, but right now I'm about like 207, 208, between there. I would say 205 to 208. I think that's within acceptable range. Of course in the future I will be getting a NIST calibrated light meter, but for now my X-Tech HD450 will do. So first of all, we have ThruNite's TN36 UT, and they publish specs of 20.36K candela. So I'm expecting about E14. So say that's about 585-ish. Now we have ThruNite's TN36. I think they published 22.4 candela, which should translate to roughly 900 lux at 5 meters. So say that was about 520. So again, the caveat is that my readings have historically been lower. I'm not sure why. I think it's just a meter. It is a very good meter, but it just has read historically lower. And there you can see again, the issue with this particular TN36 is that very aggressive ITC starts dropping the output like crazy right after turn on. So now we have ThruNite's Mini TN30. They publish, I believe, 17.6 candela, 17.6K candela, which should translate to roughly, well, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's in the caption though. See, that was about 1035, 1030. Now we have ThruNite's TN30 XML2 version. Excuse the noise, that's the rabbits. And they published 42K candela, which should translate to roughly, again, can't remember off the top of my head, but it should be in the caption though. So now I'm just waiting for 30 seconds. So say that's about 1810. So here's a Spark SP6. Although Spark has never published their beam distance, I think I last measured this around 42K lux at 1 meter. Of course now I'm measuring it at 5 meters, so we just got to find the sweet spot. I'm already past 30 seconds and now time is against me, but alright, so I would say call that about 2400-ish. Now we have Nitecore's TM26. Their published beam measurement should be 42 candela, and that should translate to roughly about 1700 lux at 5 meters. Alright, so I'll call that about 1420, given I missed it already past the 30 seconds. In terms of the fit and finish, I mean, out of all of the lights that I've reviewed, again, ThruNite does put out pretty good quality products. The switch here, electronic switch, has a nice, tactile feedback to it with each depress. The overall fit and finish is outstanding. There's no, everything's fully deburred. I think the only thing is that my particular sample actually came with a slight nick here in this corner, but that's one of how many lights that I've reviewed of theirs now. If there was one nitpick on this light, it would be this ring here. As I had highlighted, for a light of this size and weight, I would have really liked to have seen a larger ring to accommodate a proper lanyard, but again, it's not the end of the world. However, though, this particular corner is slightly sharp. And I don't mean as in it's not deburred, but meaning angularly, it's just a little bit sharp. It is fully deburred, it is fully polished, but compared to all the other nice rounded edges on the rest of the light, I just found like, this kind of sticks out. So I suppose if you wanted to dump it in your large pockets, this can, scrape, or I wouldn't say it would cut up, but it would still be a little bit of a problem perhaps if you're dumping it straight into your cargo pants and this side faces your flesh or whatnot. But anyway, not the end of the world. I would like to see a slight change to this design. Beyond that, I mean, for 7300 lumens and the output potentially sustained, obviously use your discretion. Again, I've mentioned that so many times in my video, but I can't be emphatic enough about that. But laser engraving, no different than the other lights, flawless. The groove surface here does add a little bit to the grip, but again, it's mostly the head edge here. The tail end doesn't really have too much so, but it does add to it nicely. As I've highlighted in my other videos, if you do have problems with ailments of your wrist or whatnot, be it carpal tunnel syndrome or some other ailment, this may not be the right size for you, but I actually like it a lot. It fits nicely, in my medium-sized hand. I don't have particularly large hands, and I don't think it would be a problem operating this with gloves on either, because like I said, that switch is right there. It may be hard to find the switch, but because it is on this raised bevel here, you could, kind of like just search around for it with your gloves on. Everything's smooth until you hit this point here, then you realize the switch is right there. Operation is very straightforward once you memorize it. Quick press and hold for the Firefly mode, and then turn on a single click, cycle through it, low, medium, high. And then of course double click for your turbo, double click again for your strobe. So all easily accessible from that one button. The only other thing, as I've raised on all of their lights featuring this electronic switch, is I wish there was some kind of lockout mechanism where they could reprogram the UI to accommodate that, because of the fact that the Firefly mode is taking in, that press and hold to lock. So perhaps it could have been like a 5-second depress or something like that. It's longer, but still would have been nice to have. But as I've highlighted previously, just twist it. You could easily lock it out that way. The use of the carrier, again, I don't see any problems with that. This carrier, to the best of my knowledge, is not like some LUMENS. I don't believe there is a, what was that? I think it was like kind of like a fuse built into it. On the minus side is that, it's lacking that fuse. On the plus side, once you blow it out, you don't have to worry about replacing it. On some LUMENS, you had to order a brand new carrier because that part was not user replaceable. Now, in the transition from the original TN30 series to this, TN30 actually used to have a giant spring down there to, I guess, have anti-recoil, but now all that is mainly focused here. So if you did set down the light hard enough, I suppose you could kind of like just jar it so that, well, no problem with that. It used to be that if you shake it hard enough, it would actually cut out for a few seconds on certain lights without that bottom pressing it. But I guess the spring in the head is strong enough such that no such problem with this one. So overall, for the output, its features, its build quality, it's really hard to top it. But out of the three, I gotta say, I'm kind of favoring the TN30 for some reason, but I guess it's the value proposition, right? Like I said, the only massive search and rescue I do is for like a lost remote under my sofa. I don't need 7300 lumens for that. But if I were outdoors and I really wanted something where I was searching for a particular person, thing, whatever, that's lost in the woods, and I really wanted the ability to use my peripheral vision as well without blinding me, this would definitely be the go-to light. I know a lot of people on the forums have been complaining like, oh my gosh, that 7300 lumen is so useless, it only puts out the beam to like so-and-so meters. Okay, but first of all, look at the form factor. You're not going to mount this to a gun. You're not really putting on a scope and looking out, 600, 700, 800, 900 meters, whatever it is that you're maybe searching for. So it doesn't quite fit that scenario anyway, right? The most likely scenario is that you're going to be using it handheld. In that case, I don't know, maybe you could be using it with the goggles or something else, but still, if you need a thrower, get a thrower. This is not a thrower, this is a flutter. But it does have a more diffuse beam than the TN36 because of the XHP70 emitter versus the MKR. And again, very nice floody beam profile. That's its main forte. So at the end of the day, if I had to pick one out of the three, the TN36 UT, the 36, or the mini TN30, if money was an object, typically always is, I think the TN30 would get my vote only because of the value proposition. But again, figuring in your needs, if you really needed a flutter with a very nice diffuse beam, not super tight hotspot, this would definitely be the clear choice of the three. And that concludes this review. Stay tuned in the future. I will be getting these lights outdoor for comparo shots. As part of FTC disclosure, all of the products used in this video were provided by their respective manufacturer. You can help support more reviews like this by, purchasing directly from the links and by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Thanks so much for watching.